Welcome to the Workplace Minute, powered by H3HR Advisors and sponsored by WorkHuman. Thanks for joining me for your quick update on what's important in the world of work. My name is Steve Boese. Today in the Workplace Minute, we're doing something a little different. Instead of reacting to a single headline or a big news story, this is a 2025 rewind. A chance to step back and reflect on the themes and conversations that kept showing up on this show throughout the year and what they reveal about the state of work right now. Let's break it down. 2025 was a year full of noise. Big claims about artificial intelligence, confident economic headlines, CEOs who talked about productivity, performance, and the future of work with a lot of certainty, and a job market increasingly showing signs of cracking. But when you step back and look at the stories we kept coming back to on the Workplace Minute this year, a different picture starts to take shape. 2025 was a year when many companies made a lot of profits and the stock markets kept hitting record highs, but at the same time a lot of workers felt increasingly insecure. It was a year where technology moved faster than trust, and a year where decisions made at the top often landed hardest on the people with the least power to absorb their impacts. One of the clearest themes we talked about in 2025 was the growing paradox at the center of work. Companies are posting strong profits or solid financial performance or record market caps at the same time they're announcing large layoffs. Headcount reductions were framed as strategic, disciplined, or necessary, even when the numbers suggested otherwise. For many workers, it became clear that job security was no longer tied to company success. Profitability and layoffs stopped being opposites, and they started coexisting. And that reality changed how people experience work. Even for those who kept their jobs, uncertainty became a constant companion. Loyalty felt risky, trust felt thin, and the message many workers heard, whether it was said out loud or not, was that stability was no longer part of the deal. Another theme that surfaced again and again this year was control, often disguised as culture. Mandatory return to office policies were framed as being about improving collaboration, connection, or performance, but in practice, many of these policies functioned as layoffs in disguise. Leaders knew that some people would rather leave than comply, or simply could not comply due to relocations and a stagnant housing market, and in many cases for CEOs, that was part of their plan. What made these return to office dynamics especially difficult was the disconnect between those who have choices and those who don't. Senior leaders and high-demand talent often retained their flexibility, while everyone else was told their presence equaled commitment. In 2025, a lot of workplace decisions revealed less about productivity and more about power. They told us who was trusted, who was replaceable, and who was expected to simply absorb these disruptions quietly. We also spent plenty of time on the Workplace Minute this year talking about something that didn't always make the headlines, but still matters deeply. I'm referring to the quiet retreat from corporate diversity, equity, and inclusion commitments. These were not always dramatic rollbacks, but subtle shifts. Programs were paused, language was softened, roles were rebranded or even eliminated, and conversations were just avoided. In many organizations, DE&I didn't completely disappear, but it became much less prominent and even hidden from public view. And that mattered, because 2025 tested whether corporate values were durable or only present when they were convenient. And it showed that when legal pressure, political pressure, or economic pressure increased, some organizations chose silence over leadership. And that choice sent a clear message, whether intended or not, about whose experiences mattered and when. And how this played out in 2025 can be seen from the experience of Target, who famously walked back long-standing DE&I support and subsequently faced protests, consumer boycotts, and declining sales and market share as a result. Threaded through all of this was technology, especially AI. We talked a lot about AI in 2025 on the Workplace Minute, and for good reason. But one thing became increasingly clear over the course of the year. Technology is not causing these workplace dynamics, but it is accelerating them. AI became an amplifier of organizational priorities, incentives, and values. Productivity gains tended to flow upward. In some organizations, surveillance and monitoring tools gained more legitimacy, and automation promised increased efficiency, often without equal attention to its impacts. The technology itself wasn't neutral either, but more importantly, the decisions about how it was used weren't neutral either. In 2025, AI reflected leadership choices as much as it reshaped them. And as 2026 begins, how organizations manage the challenge of AI adoption against the insane expectations for productivity and efficiency that many CEOs have, and balance them with the human impact that they will most likely cause, well, that will probably be the most important issues again for organizations large and small. And all of this leads us to something else we talked about quite often in 2025: worker frustration, burnout, cynicism. And it's important to talk about this clearly. These frustrations weren't about unfair expectations or expectations for entitlement. They were very rational. For many people, work demanded more in 2025, while at the same time offering less security, less flexibility, lower rewards, and less honesty from leaders in return. Workers of all ages felt the pressure of financial stress, caregiving demands, declining mental health, and a polarized political and cultural environment. Feeling unsettled in these environments wasn't a failure of them or a failure of their resilience. It was a reasonable response to the reality of work and life in 2025. So what does all of this tell us as we close out the year? For leaders, 2025 is a reminder that your decisions compound, that trust, once lost, is hard to regain, and that saying people are your most important asset means very little if your actions consistently tell a different story. Layoffs, return to office mandates, retreating from values like DE&I may seem to solve short-term problems, but they often create long-term consequences. And culture isn't what leaders say in town halls. You simply can't town hall your way to real cultural change. Culture is what people experience when times get tough. And for individuals listening, especially workers who felt squeezed or sidelined this year, your experience still matters. Your voice still matters. Even in systems that feel stacked against you, progress has always come from people refusing to accept that the way work is today is the way it has to be tomorrow. Making work better isn't a naive goal, it's a necessary one. And as we head into 2026, the question isn't whether work will keep changing. It will. The real question is who these changes are for, how they will impact average workers and their families, and who is willing to take responsibility for shaping them. That's the challenge 2025 leaves us with, and that's the one we'll keep taking on here on the Workplace Minute. Thank you so much for listening to the Workplace Minute this year, and a big thank you to WorkHuman for supporting the show. If this episode made you think about how work in 2026 will play out in your organization, please share it with a colleague. We'll be back in 2026. I'm Steve Boese, and this has been the Workplace Minute from H3 HR Advisors.